Hi everyone, and welcome to the video presentation for Module 13. This module will talk about seventh chords. So after watching this video, you'll be able to define the term seventh chord, create and identify the 5 types of seventh chords, identify the parts of a seventh chord, and be able to indicate and also write a seventh chord according to its name. Seventh chords are tertian harmonies, right? Just like triads. And tertian, remember, just means that they're chords that are made out of thirds, right? And so these are chords that we're used to hearing. So like a triad, right, was made up of all thirds. A seventh chord is also made up of all thirds, but it has 4 notes instead of 3. Seventh chords are created by adding another third above the fifth of a triad. Okay, so let's look at how that works. So on the staff, if you're going to write a seventh chord, you'd start by writing the triad that seventh chord needs. And in this case, this seventh chord needs a C major triad. And then to make it a seventh, we just add a third above that top note of the triad. So a third above the fifth of the triad. And so a third above the fifth of this triad would be a B, and that creates the interval of a seventh between the root and that top note, and that makes this a seventh chord. Okay, you can do that with any triad. So here is what looks like an F sharp minor triad, and if we added a seventh above that, it becomes this kind of seventh chord. Okay. Here's a G minor triad, and if we add a seventh above that, right, it becomes that kind of seventh chord. Here is a G sharp diminished triad, so you can also add sevenths above those kinds of triads. So here's the G sharp diminished triad, and to make it into a seventh chord, we would just add an F, right? It makes it into a seventh chord that sounds like that. Let's talk about the parts of a seventh chord and how we refer to them. So like we just talked about, seventh chords are made up of a triad and a seventh. So the triad is always the bottom part of the seventh chord. And it can be a major triad, it can be a minor triad, it can be a diminished triad. In this case right here, it's a D minor triad. So when we're thinking about seventh chords, we're always thinking about them in terms of their triad, and also their top note, which we call the seventh of the chord. Okay? And of course, all the parts of the triad still have their names, right? So it's still the root. D is still the root of this chord, right? F is still the third of this chord. A is still the fifth of this chord. So those are all those names are exactly the same as they are for regular triads. But then we have that additional note called the seventh. And so just like triads, seventh chords are named after their root and their type. And so this has the root of D, and as we'll see in a second, this is a minor seventh chord, so we call this a D minor seventh chord. Let's talk about those types of seventh chords. There are 5 common types of seventh chords, and they're defined by different combinations of triads and sevenths. So the first one is called the major seventh chord, and it is built from having a major triad on the bottom, so in this case an F major triad, and it also has a major seventh between the root and the seventh, so a major seventh above that major triad. Okay, so major triad, major seventh creates a major seventh chord. The most common one is called the major minor seventh, or also sometimes called the dominant seventh chord. This one will have a major triad on the bottom again, just like the one before. But instead of a major seventh, it has a minor seventh. So it has a minor seventh between the root and the seventh of the chord. Right, which gives it kind of this insistent kind of sound, right? Like it needs to go somewhere. Right? So we call that, with a major triad and a minor seventh, that's called a major minor seventh or a dominant seventh chord. Both of those names are acceptable. Okay? And so we've had major triad, major seventh. We've had major triad, minor seventh. Now this chord has a minor triad and a minor seventh, and we call it a minor seventh chord. So minor triad, an F minor triad, and then a minor seventh, F to E flat, creates a minor seventh chord. Okay. Then we have two kinds of diminished chords. So both of these seventh chords have a diminished triad. So the one that has a diminished triad on the bottom, so this is an F diminished triad. If we add a minor seventh on top of that, this becomes what's called a half diminished seventh chord. And then there's one that's a little bit more severe, or I don't know, nervous sounding as the other one, right? Tense sounding. And we call this a fully diminished seventh chord. And so this will have, again, a diminished triad on the bottom, but then it has a diminished seventh between the root and the seventh. And so a diminished seventh would actually be an E double flat in this case. Right? And that chord definitely feels like it needs to go somewhere. Right? It's on its way to something, right? Something like that, right? Okay. So these are the 5 most common seventh chords. There are a lot more possibilities, but they don't really get heard very much in the style of music that we're studying. So these are the 5 that we need to memorize. And one way you can think about this is, you know, as like getting smaller. So as we go sort of to the right, or from left to right on each of these rows, right, they get smaller from the one that came before. So that major seventh chord has a major triad and a minor seventh. Then we make it smaller by making that major seventh into a minor seventh and keeping the major triad, and it becomes dominant. Then we make everything smaller. We keep that minor seventh and we make the minor triad smaller, so it becomes a minor seventh. Then we make the triad smaller again by making that minor triad into a diminished triad and keeping the minor seventh, and it becomes a half diminished seventh. And then finally, the smallest we can get is if we take that diminished triad, keep it, and make the seventh even smaller, making it diminished. So there's kind of like this process of things getting smaller. So major seventh, dominant seventh, minor seventh, half diminished seventh, and the smallest fully diminished seventh. Okay. All right, and then we have abbreviations for these too. So we use a capital M with a little 7 above it to identify a major seventh. So this chord on all the way on the left there would be called an F major seventh chord, and we'd use F, M, capital M, and a 7 to indicate that. The book likes to call this, or use the label capital M and lowercase m. In real life, you'll also just see this as like an F with a 7. That just means dominant. But for the book, for purposes of the book we're using, it is F with a capital M and a lowercase m and a 7, and that means it's a major minor seventh chord. And then lowercase m with a 7 means that it's a minor seventh chord. So this is an F minor seventh chord. And over here, the little circle with a slash through it means that it's a half diminished seventh chord. And the reason it's a circle with a slash is because, remember, the circle means diminished, but this is only half of that. So it's like we're cutting the circle in half with that slash. So that means that this is a half diminished seventh chord. And then, of course, the fully diminished gets the regular old circle symbol. Okay, so those are the abbreviations we use for these seventh chords. So let's do a couple examples of writing seventh chords. So the process is similar for writing triads. You want to write the root of the seventh chord first. Then you want to add the correct triad according to the type of seventh chord that you want. Then you add the seventh according to the type of seventh chord that you want. So let's look at these 3 examples. So the first example is a C minor seventh chord. So it's C is the root. M, lowercase m means minor. And then 7 means seventh, right? So this is asking for a C minor seventh chord. So start by writing the note C the staff, and that's our root. Then a C minor seventh calls for a minor triad, so we'll add an E flat and a G, and that creates a C minor triad. Then we need to add a note that makes a minor seventh above the root, and to spell a minor seventh above C, we have to use a B flat. So the answer for this is a C minor triad with a B flat on top. And let me fix this because that flat should go on the same line as the note. There you go. All right, let's look at this next one. This is asking for an E flat fully diminished seventh chord. So start by writing in the root, and the root for this will be an E flat. And notice that we are in bass clef, so the root is E flat here. We want to create a diminished triad, so we need to add a G flat and a B double flat, right, to make it a diminished fifth for that kind of triad. Then we want to add a seventh that will be a fully diminished seventh above E flat. So that will be, if we add a D, that's a major seventh. If we make it a D flat, that's a minor seventh. So we need to make it even smaller. So we'll use double flat, and that creates our E fully diminished seventh chord. All right, and then our last one here is asking for a D major seventh chord. Now this is our old friend, the tenor clef. So we need to find the note D first, so that can be a little bit tricky. So I know that this line is C, this space is B, this is A, this would be G, this would be F, this would be E, and so D is going to be this note right here. All right, and so we want to add notes that will create a major triad on the bottom, so that's going to be D to F sharp, and then A. So that's our major triad. Then we want to add a note that will create a major seventh between the root and the seventh, and so that's going to be a C sharp. All right, so that's a quick little tutorial of how to spell these seventh chords. You always just want to write the root of the seventh chord first, and that's really obvious, it's in the name, right? Then you want to add the correct triad according to the type. So while you're first starting out, you may have to look that up. Then you want to add the correct seventh according to type, and then you'll end up with the correct seventh chord. Now I think, like with the triads, the examples, the exercises we do in the workbook and stuff is a little bit easier because they give you the root, that's the note of the staff. They give you a note on the staff, and that note is the root. So you just have to kind of go from there. So it's a little bit easier to figure out. All right, well, thank you so much for watching. Again, if you have any questions, you can save them for the Zoom session or post them in the discussion forum. Yeah, and again, I hope this was helpful, and have a great day.